Do we have too many draw cards? What sparked this discussion for me was how a lot of decks are either playing a ton of draw power, like Sky Striker Orcus, or slower decks are taking advantage of huge +1 draw cards. In today's video, I want to go over what I feel are each category of draw cards, the merits of each, and answer the question, do we have too many draw cards? First, we have what I feel is the most unhealthy category, being the turbo draw cards. What makes this category labeled as such is how none of these cards have a hard once per turn restriction, meaning you can just keep activating them from your hand and quote unquote turbo through your deck. Some cards to note on this list would be Upstart Goblin, Allure of Darkness, and Into the Void. You will probably recognize that this package is being played in decks like Pendulum and Orcus, and the reason being is because you want to see the rest of your deck, and so turboing through your deck to see powerful 3 of cards really helps. But as time has progressed in Yu-Gi-Oh, there have been strategies that gain benefits from turbo cards and spells in general. A perfect example of this is Pendulum. Typically, a deck can just activate a spell for the sake of its effect, whereas the spell counter Pendulum strategy takes advantage of these spells one step further to not only gain spell counters, but use those counters for powerful effects like Servant of Endymion, which can special summon one monster that can hold spell counters on it from the deck, along with itself from the Pendulum zone by removing 3 spell counters from it. In my opinion, the reason why these turbo cards are so prevalent right now is because of the Sky Striker engine, which I'll discuss further when I discuss draw engines. But long story short, you can get more +1s by having a multitude of turbo cards, or just spell cards in general in your graveyard. I think the biggest thing with turbo cards is that while they go neutral, seeing the rest of your deck, like your side deck, powerful 3-ofs, etc., really makes a difference. With the 3 cards I mentioned in this category, there is one I really see to be unfair at 3 copies. While Upstart is limited, which I feel is fine, and Allure of Darkness requires you to banish a dark, Into the Void doesn't really have any side effects if you build your deck to be able to use Into the Void. Into the Void promotes a 36 card deck strategy, with 3 Into the Void and 1 Upstart, which does inherently break traditional deck building rules of only 40 cards. You could say the reason Upstart is limited is that not only does it let you break these rules, but it inherently lets you turbo through your deck too quickly, and it at 3 copies promotes its play in almost every deck. The exact same logic, however, can be applied to Into the Void. I feel the biggest difference, however, was that Upstart was limited at a time where you don't necessarily gain advantage from it being a spell, whereas Into the Void being a spell gives you immense benefits with strategies that I mentioned like Sky Striker and Pendulum, and in the future when more cards come out to make spells even better, this card will help even further. The next package I'll discuss are the draw power engines, those being the Spellbook and Sky Striker engines. These promote pluses for the sake of engine requirements and other criteria. For example, the Spellbook engine requires engine requirements like knowledge, but it also requires you to not need your normal summon, which isn't viable for every deck. It is rewarding to get the +1 from this engine, however, and I feel it definitely is noteworthy. We also have the Sky Striker engine, which as I've already mentioned is quite powerful. Engage being the main card of this engine, having no requirement to activate other than no monsters in the main monster zone, and having a Sky Striker card in deck is easy to resolve. The perk of this engine and why it's so powerful, however, is because with 3 spells in grave, you can additionally draw 1 card. If you could only do this once per copy, that would be fine. The problem, however, is when we keep in mind that it's not a hard once per turn. You can search Hornet Drones to summon Kagari, add back the engage, and then activate it again. In a deck like pure Sky Striker, this is a bit more fair, but in a deck like Sky Striker Orcus, it gets outrageous how much advantage that deck gains from some turbo cards and engage. I'll have a banlist prediction video coming out later this week, so make sure to check that out. But long story short, this engine can't stay unaffected. Before we continue, if you want to join an awesome community of people, make sure to check out my Discord server. I'd love to have you there. With that, let's continue the video. The third side of draw cards are the stun cards, i.e. cards like Card of Demise, Duality, Extravagance, etc. These cards, in my opinion, are very fair. The reason being is because they promote the health of slower strategies. You won't see a deck like Orcus playing Card of Demise because they do want a special summon on the first turn, whereas a deck like True Draco BladeYGO doesn't special summon, meaning they can take advantage of this powerful card. Extravagance is a similar card, where if your extra deck doesn't matter and adding cards for the rest of the turn doesn't matter, you can just play 3 Extravagance for the +1, which in my opinion is also very strong. Duality falls under a similar scenario as Card of Demise, and just improves consistency overall rather than being a +1. These 3 cards are perfect examples of stun draw cards, and while not necessarily always needing to be played in stun, I think this is a good example of healthy draw cards because they drastically help slower strategies compete in the metagame. Lastly, I just threw a few generic draw cards here, so I guess we'll call them the other draw cards, as much as I don't want to do that. First, we have Pot of Desires. I didn't feel like it would work in the turbo category, so I just threw it here for simplicity's sake. Pot of Desires is inherently a +1, and while it can come with drawbacks for decks that have a lot of 1-ofs, getting that immediate value is so good, especially because this card can technically be played in any deck, which I feel is one of the biggest perks about this card. While Desires can be played in any deck, we have the reverse of Sekka's Light, only being able to be played in decks that play all monsters. It's not like this card hasn't seen success. Danger Thunder is a perfect example of this card being amazing and seeing success. I feel we'll see more play in the future, as it's not hard for an all monster deck to exist nowadays. It just heavily depends on the archetype. Let me tell you though, getting the +1 and mulligan effect is incredibly powerful and isn't something to sleep on. The final point I want to make in this video is that in-theme archetype draw cards can promote other draw cards being played. So for example, Orchestrated Return promotes all of the turbo cards being played because there's another draw card to add to the deck. This trend could definitely return. See what I did there? In the future, and while I think cards like Allure are fine because they are restricted to dark decks, a card like Into the Void, as I explained earlier, is unhealthy for the format and should definitely be put on the ban list in my opinion. So do we have too many draw cards? I feel having more draw cards promotes different strategies thriving further. And so if you could play all these draw cards in all strategies, then I think that would be a bit unfair. But because these draw cards are designated to specific categories and only specific decks can play some of these draw cards, then honestly, I feel it's fine. Again, the only draw card I feel is really unfair is Into the Void for the reasons I've already stated. If you guys want to see some discussions on new Link monsters like Crystron Helki Fibrak and Predaplant Verte Anaconda, make sure to click on the end screen right next to me, subscribe if you enjoy my content, and with that, I hope to see you soon.